has come from Hillfield Priory to talk about ecology and the Franciscan understanding. I found an interesting thing about Brother Samuel, that he once upon a time was at St Benet's in Cambridge. And if you know St Benet's, it's a lovely church, peaceful, real deep spirituality. So thank you very much. And I hope there is a resonance of St Benet's here for you. So welcome. God bless you.
Thank you very much. Brothers and sisters, the Lord give you peace. It's good to be with you. If I go to a school, visit a school to take an assembly, and I ask the children if they know anything or what they know about St. Francis, a sea of hands will rise up. And I know what they're going to say. He loved animals, because every child in a church school, at any rate, knows that about St. Francis, and most other people. He was the one who loved animals. He tamed the vicious wolf, who preached to the birds, who rescued a lamb from the butchers, who was awakened each morning by a helpful cricket, chirping cricket. And he's pictured in art from Giotto down to the present day, portrayed in stained glass windows and in plastic statues, with birds in his hands and a furry rabbit on his shoulder. In the cloister at St Mary of the Angels, Santa Maria dell'Angeli in Assisi, the mother church of all Franciscans, in the cloister there's a life-size statue of St. Francis, and in his hand is what looks like a porcelain white dove, except that you see people gathered all around it, looking at it, because it moves, it's live, it's a perfect white dove. And I wonder how much they spend on birdseed to keep it there. All this image of St. Francis is very attractive, very beautiful, and some of it is true. Francis, like several holy men and women throughout the ages, St. Seraphim of South was another, who had a bear who used to come and visit him in the woods. Like several holy men and women through the ages, and like others not so obviously holy, had a way with animals, a way of calming their fear, a way of encouraging their trust, a way of recognizing their worth and their need. But there is, I believe, a danger in this memory of Francis, almost exclusive. It's almost all that everybody know about is St. Francis. There's a danger in it, however attractive, the danger of sentimentality. If we remember Francis simply as a lover of animals, a medieval horse whisperer, we'll have missed out on the much wider significance of his life and the Franciscan tradition, the tradition that flows from him, the much wider significance of all that for our understanding of our world, for our relationship with the environment today, if we just see him as the friend of animals. In people's minds, Francis may be the patron saint of animals. Some people say this to me, he's the patron saint of animals. Well, actually, he's not the patron saint of animals, not officially at any rate. He's officially, according to the Roman Catholic Church, he's the patron saint of ecology. He was made such by Pope John Paul II in 1981. That is, he's the patron saint of the wisdom of the household. That's what ecology means. Oikos logos. How to live sanely, safely, humbly, compassionately, and wonderingly in relation to the world around us today. And it's this household wisdom of Francis, this Franciscan ecology, that I want to explore with you today. Francis saw and helps us see the world differently, seeing ourselves differently, seeing each other differently, seeing the rest of creation differently, seeing every creature differently. And I believe there are three ways, three elements to this different way of looking and seeing at the world. And the first is that he saw the world, Francis saw the world essentially as gift. Thomas of Celano, his earliest biographer, said of Francis that in every beautiful thing, Francis saw the one who is beauty itself. And from his contemplation of the creatures on earth, his mind soared aloft to the giver and source of all things. For Francis, the universe is a theophany, a revelation of God, an expression of God's love and generosity and mercy and ingenuity. Creation, said Francis, and the Franciscan tradition that followed him, is an overflowing of the life of the Blessed Trinity, an outpouring of the abundant goodness of God. Every creature, everything, is pure gift, and as such it bears God's imprint, God's mark. The later Franciscans, particularly St. Bonaventure, and I think you've had a session on Bonaventure last week, creation is a mirror which reflects God to us. Or he sometimes spoke of creation as a book. Everything, every creature is a word of God. It's the first book, Bonaventure said. The second, of course, is the Scriptures. And the final word, of course, is Jesus Christ himself. Christ fulfills all creation. Duns Scotus, following a little bit after Bonaventure, says that Christ is God's goal in creation. Every creature, by being what it is, points us to Christ. Points us to Christ in its thisness. It points us to Christ. It reveals something of Christ. And some of you will know Jeremy Hopkins' poetry, his great poem, As Kingfishers Catch Fire. He talks about everything that does Christ. That is, yes, points us to Christ. Jeremiah Hopkins was deeply influenced by Duns Scotus. Angela of Foligno, another medieval Franciscan, after the time of St. Francis in the 14th century, she said, the world is pregnant with God. I love that idea. The world pregnant with God, bursting, waiting to burst with God's life. And you know, I have a sense of that when I read Gerard Manley Hopkins' poetry, but also when I see David Attenborough's programs on the television, his nature programs. The way he sort of has, there's a great excitement about the wonder of each individual creature that is around him. And I suppose I also get that sense of wonder and excitement and sense of giftedness walking through the countryside in springtime, or perhaps just walking down the road here, seeing the colour of the leaves. Now the consequences of this way of seeing the world essentially as gift, a gift revealing the giver, the consequences of this economy of gift are huge. Because if the world and everything in it is a gift from God, capable of revealing God to us, then everything has value. Everything has intrinsic value. Everything has a place, a right to be. And that is a radically different approach to our predominant worldview today, our way of seeing the world today. nature, in which nature is there for, our creation is there essentially for our use, our consumption, our benefit, our profit, our enjoyment. Where that comes from is interesting. Francis Bacon, the philosopher of the 16th century, plays a key part in it. Because he said that nature is there for us to tame it and to harness it for our use. It's to be accumulated, it's to be possessed, it's to be used, and as we know, to be chucked away. Francis, on the other hand, gave instructions to his gardener, the gardener at one of the friaries, the brother gardener at one of the friaries. He said, you must always in the vegetable patch leave a place for the weeds, because they have a right to be. Now, not every gardener would be totally sympathetic to that, but it's very good ecology. It's wisdom. We need biodiversity. We need companion planting. There is no such thing as waste, as trash, as rubbish in Francis's worldview. Dave Bookless, the former director of the environmental organisation Arusha, he's written a book entitled God Doesn't Do Rubbish. God doesn't do rubbish, God doesn't do waste. Everything itself, in itself, has an intrinsic value. Francis loved not just the swallows, beautiful swallows, but the crows. And crows, although they are the most intelligent of birds, are not the most beautiful. He loved not just the furry rabbit, but the fierce wolf and the cockroach. He loved not just beautiful people, but lepers, especially lepers. All these are an expression of God's goodness. All these are God's gift. There's a story of Francis and one of his brothers, an aristocratic brother, Rufino, going out begging in the streets of Assisi. And they went from door to door with their begging bowls, asking for scraps of food. And because Rufino was an aristocrat and was good looking, he received more bits of food than Francis did. But when they had enough, they went down below Assisi to the river which flows below the city, and they laid out their scraps, their begging bowl, on a stone beside the river. And Francis began to give praise for the great feast which they were now sharing. A long grace, praising God for all the goodness, for the giftedness of all things. And this was too much for Rufino. I mean, it was as much indignity that he had an indignity of begging around the streets of their city. And now he was asking to give praise for this feast. But Francis said, yes, but it is a feast, because all that we have here is from God. This beautiful, clean table, this flowing, clear stream, and this food, which is a gift to us, which is blessed by its giftedness. For Francis, Lady Poverty, as he called her, was a precious bride. Not because poverty, or destitution, or homelessness, or hunger is of value in itself, but because voluntary poverty embraced, actually can help us to recognize the giftedness of all things. It brings us to a recognition of the essential economy of gift under which we all do live. St. Augustine of Hippo, writing a long time before Francis, said that God longs to give us something. God longs to give us the precious gift of himself, but we're not able to receive it. because our hands are already too full. That was said 1600 years ago. How much more could it be said today as we push our groaning trolleys around the supermarket, just filling them up with the stuff from the shelves? Our consumerist, our consumptive society is literally wasting us away, laying waste through huge exploitation to both environment and our human society. It's sometimes said that of people that they are too materialist. It's sometimes said from pulpits, oh, people are too materialist. Francis wouldn't say we were too materialist. He would say we were not materialist enough, because we do not recognize the giftedness of all things, of material things. We don't recognize the intrinsic value of all creatures. It's consumerism which consumes us, which destroys us, that desire to possess, to accumulate, to exploit, to use. Francis, on the other hand, has this sacramental view of creation, which sees everything as having the ability to point us to God, to reveal something of God's goodness, of God's nature, God's generosity to us. So that economy of gift, I would say, is the first foundation stone of Franciscan ecology, a different way of looking at the world, of living in the world. And the second is this. When Francis, writing at the end of his life, he wrote a testament, his last testament, some months before his death. And he begins one of the paragraphs with the words, "When the Lord gave me brothers," when the Lord gave me brothers. It's a hugely significant phrase for him, because fraternity, brotherliness, sorority, familyness is at the heart of Francis's view of the world. Being a brother. When did that begin for Francis? Did it begin when he embraced a leper on the road outside Assisi as a young man? Or was it when the first men began to join him? Or was it when he lived as a hermit in the woods and came to that intimate relationship with the creatures around him? Or was it on the top of Monte Spazio, as you look down the Apennine range and can see the whole world, as it were, laid out in front of you? Or was it around the streets of Assisi amongst the poor? When was it that he discovered this brotherliness? Possibly it was an evolving understanding for him. But certainly for him, Jesus, our brother, is at the heart of that family, who reveals to him the extent of the family, because Jesus is the universal brother, said Francis. Oh, how lovely it is, writing, says Francis, writing to a letter to all the faithful. Oh, how lovely it is to have a brother like this. Oh, how wonderful, how beautiful, how passionate, how glorious it is to have a brother like this, who lays down his life for the sheep. Thomas of Celano, again writing in his biography of Francis, said that he addressed every creature by the name of brother or sister, no matter how small they were. Brother ant, brother bacteria. He called every creature by the name of brother or sister because he saw that we all come from the same beginning, the same source. So he spoke of brother sun and sister moon, and brother fire and sister water, Mother Earth giving birth to the brothers and sisters, the plants and the animals and the creatures of the world, in their millions and millions of species. We had a brother once, he's long dead now, Brother Nicky, who used to take this to a sort of inordinate length. He would sit at table and ask and say, please pass Brother Potato, can I have Sister Water, please, can I have... And Brother Bread, well, it got slightly tedious. An argument as to whether it was a brother or sister. You may think all this is quite fanciful, but of course, it's true. it's true theologically, it's true scientifically. Genetically, we belong to each other. You and I share 98% of our genes, 98% of our genes with those of an orangutan. We share 90% of our genes with those of a banana. Yeah. We are made of the same stuff as the bench you're sitting on, as the floor beneath your feet. We all come from Mother Earth, from the humus. Adam comes from Adama, the earth in the Hebrew. And the greatest threat to our survival, I would suggest, as a human race, and the survival of countless species around us, is our innate tendency to hubris, to forgetting where we come from, to losing touch with the humus, the collective amnesia about our relatedness and our essential interdependence, the fact that we belong. The great American agrarian writer, Wendell Berry, and if you've never come across him, you really must read him. He's the finest essayist in the English language, I would claim, and others would claim. He says that our loss of relationship with the soil, with the top 8 inches which lies over the face of this earth, and the loss of our relatedness with it and our care for its fertility is the greatest threat to our civilization. For without it, if we've lost that sense of relationship, as we are losing it, we are doomed, frankly, as a race. And not just our loss of relationship with the earth, though, but with every creature that springs from the earth. And nowhere is it more serious, I would suggest, than in our ignorance of the food chain by which we live. There's actually nothing wrong with horse meat. It's perfectly good to eat. If you take little care of the chemicals which they might have put into it to kill the horses or to treat the horses. But the real scandal of the horse meat was that it showed that we just hadn't a clue where the food came from. It hadn't a clue that actually in some cases there were 14 different transactions. It had passed through 14 different agencies before arriving in the Findus meat pie or whatever it was. Most of us have no clue, not only of where our food comes from, but of the labour, of the cost, of the energy, of the destruction that has gone into its production. Most of us have not one clue. We live, as Wendell Berry says, in an unreal world, a false economy, a failed financial system, which has no sense of coming from the same source and therefore belonging to the same family, of living as brothers and sisters, and which therefore leads inevitably to ecocide, to the destruction of the creation. I think it's hugely important for us to recognize that ecocide, the destruction of creation, and genocide, the destruction of peoples, are themselves intricately connected. Most wars today are being fought over the possession and use and destruction of resources. The war in the Congo, for instance, which has gone almost unnoticed because it's been going on for so long, claiming 4 million lives and rising day by day, is to do with minerals, the control of minerals. The irony of our world today is that we live in a society where the rapid advance in technology of communication has made it easier to communicate with people around the other side of the world, to have instant communication around the world, to travel around the world in a way which even my parents would have thought unimaginable. And yet increasingly, we are becoming disconnected from the world around us. Disconnected from place, from the land, from other creatures. And I would suggest, even with Facebook, with other human beings as well. Loneliness is the curse of human society today. More than 30% of the population of this country lives on its own. Francis, when speaking of creatures, it said of Francis that when speaking of creatures and when interacting with fellow creatures around him, he spoke with piety. His attitude towards creatures was pious, which sounds rather odd. I mean, because we think of piety as being something to do with a certain sort of po-faced religiosity. But actually the original meaning of piety, the Latin meaning of piety, the original meaning, is the obligation which is owed to someone of one's own blood relationship. The obligation owed to members of your own family. That's what pietas is about. Francis had that sense of obligation, of relationship with every creature, it is said. He also was said to have had courtesy towards all creatures. Again, he saw them as being part of the court. And so courtly behaviour was the appropriate way to relate to animals, to inanimate creatures, as well as to human beings. I suppose we'd sum up the word, those sort of attitudes today by the word affection. Francis had a deep, deep affection for the world around him. Madeline Bunting, writing in The Guardian, some few years ago now, says that would bewail that children today have so little opportunity really to experience nature in the raw. You can't see the stars, most part, unless you go right out into the country. You don't really see nature in the raw. And health and safety is preventing every sort of real engagement with the wild. It's not safe. And she says we need an attentiveness to nature to understand our humanity, who we are as human beings, and how we fit as just one species into a vast reach of time and place. Rediscover the humus. Recognize our connectedness. Know that we belong. That's what Francis says. And the third and last building block to Franciscan ecology was that Francis knew how to sing in tune. He knew how to sing in tune. Francis's preaching was often, by our gentle Church of England standards, pretty fierce. His sermons were peppered with warnings of hell and destruction, and he always gave a strong, strong call to repentance, to turn away from destruction and to find life in fellowship with our brothers and sisters and with Jesus Christ. The ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew II today is a great speaker on ecology, great passionate campaigner for ecology. He gets heads of governments together to address issues of ecology around the world. He always includes something about the need for eco-penance, the need to change, to have a fundamental change, and the consequences of not changing, which are destruction for us and for our world as we know it. Bonaventure said much the same thing nearly 800 years ago. Open your eyes, he said, alert your spiritual ears, unseal your lips and apply your hearts so that in all creatures you may see, hear, praise, love, serve, glorify and honour God, lest the whole world rise up against you. For the universe, he said, will wage war against the foolish. And beloved Rowan Williams, more recently, said, our present ecological crisis has a lot to do with our failure to think of the world as existing in relation to the mystery of God, and not just a huge warehouse of stuff to be used for our convenience. Not just a huge warehouse of stuff. Francis saw our world, ours and every creature in it, our true end, as the praise and the glory of God. And I would suggest that alongside our loss of that sense of an economy of gift, the idea or the concept of where everything comes from, and along with our forgetfulness that we essentially belong together as part of the same faith, I would also suggest that it's our blindness and ignorance of our true goal which is a crucial element of the present ecological crisis in which we find ourselves. When we put material well-being, when we put economic productivity, when we put political program, when we put the assumption of inevitable progress, when we put the care of our own families, when we put even the care of nature above all else, above honouring and loving and praising and worshipping the source and goal of all things, then inevitably we end up with worshipping idols. And that always leads to destruction. Always. The true end of man, said the Westminster Confession at the beginning of the 17th century, the true end of man is to know God and to honour God and to enjoy God forever. And in fact, that is the only safe goal we can have for the safety of our creation, for the survival of our creation. Towards the end of his life, Francis composed what we know as the Canticle of the Creatures. It was the first great hymn, great poem in the Italian vernacular. It's a landmark in the Italian language. He wrote it at a time of great depression in his life, when he saw himself as a failure, when his order was slipping away from him, when he was suffering physical pain, when he was going blind. Yet somehow, from that time, at that time, he wrote this great hymn of creation. You'll know it in the words of Mrs. Alexander's hymn, All Creatures of Our God and King. Not the most happy translation. But here's another metrical version. Most high, omnipotent, good Lord, to you be ceaseless praise outpoured, and blessing without measure. From you alone all creatures came. No one is worthy you to name. And he goes on, my Lord be praised, my brother sun, who through the skies his course does run, and shines in brilliant splendour. With brightness he does fill the day, and signifies your boundless sway. My Lord be praised, my sister moon, and so on. Everything giving praise to God. Everything offering worship and adoration to the source of all things and to the goal of all things. It's very interesting. He doesn't say, be praised, my God, for brother sun, or for Mother Earth, or for Sister Water. He says the Italian pair, as I'm sure some of you will know, is equally translated with and by. So the canticle reads, be praised, my Lord, by or with all these creatures. Francis had this deep sense that he was articulating the praise which is going on all the time. He was giving voice to creation's praise. And that actually isn't new just to Francis, it's there in the scriptures, it's there in the Psalms. Just read Psalm 148. It's doing the same thing. Francis singing with them, giving praise. They're praising by their shining, by their twinkling, by their growing, by their flowering, by their flourishing. And Francis articulates that. And I suggest that it's an essential thing for us for the safety of the earth, is to learn too how to praise, how to sing in tune, how to sing in harmony with creation. The trouble is, our praise is so often just a bit dull. I mean, hymns, nature and modern just don't quite do it. Or even, mission praise, or the latest sort of, praise song doesn't do it. We don't know how to praise, not just with music, but in words, but in arts and in craft and in everything we make and do. I saw a wonderful program, some wonderful Songs of Praise program, just after the rebuilding of the St. George's Hall at Windsor Castle after the Great Fire. And they interviewed the carpenter who'd worked on the roof. And he said, I've been working on this roof for the past 2 years, and I can't tell you the privilege and the joy it has been to work with these most wonderful materials. He said, my hymn is not in any hymn book. My hymn is this roof itself. It gives praise to God, or it offers praise to God. We need to learn how to do that, how to recognize that. An economy of gift, belonging to the same family, singing in harmony. Those are the elements, I believe, of Francis's way of looking at the world. An integrated ecology, which is environmental, which is social, which is spiritual. And I believe is actually essential to our world today, if we're to learn to live sanely, humbly, and joyfully again. Jonathan Porritt, Sir Jonathan Porritt, the great environmentalist, he wrote some time ago that what the world needs in the present ecological crisis is not so much a cap on carbon emissions, although that's very important. Not so much a way of living without fossil fuels, well, that's very important. Not just a way of eating better, although that's very important. What's needed is a radical reorientation of the way we understand ourselves into relation to the rest of creation. A radical reorientation, akin, he said, to a spiritual revolution. And I would suggest Francis gives us just that. Just that.
Thank you very much. I think you witnessed what I understand as creation giving praise in silence. So thank you for that. But would you like to take some questions?
Sure. We need some time to
You rightly, and indeed St. Francis rightly, accords worth to the inherent worth and dignity of life. How does that accord with the later, with the concept of original sin promulgated many hundreds of years after the crucifixion?
Well, I think what we see in the world today and the way we live dysfunctionally in the world as what I would see an expression of original sin, an inherent tendency among us and within us, within all of us within creation, to mess it up. I do believe there is a tendency to get it all wrong. Now, I'm not sort of fundamentalist in the view of it all comes from Adam eating the apple and it's to do with sex. It's nothing to do with that at all. But there is, and St. Paul talks about the groaning of creation, creation groaning in travail in Romans. And, I think we're living in that. We're experiencing that. But that doesn't take away from the fundamental goodness and abundance and the giftedness and intrinsic worth of all things. It just, it bewails the state to which it bewails us, our ignorance of that. So sure, I mean, I don't, I think it's possible to think of that innate tendency for us to mess it up, along with the sense of giftedness.
Thank you for the eloquent and enlightening thought. I can't help wondering what is left in many parts of the patristic tradition of Eastern Augustine. I have a sense that somehow creation itself is caught up in the form, and that there's a basic force in nature. Things are out of joint. It's not just a revelation of divine order and beauty, but there is also, I think, the more one reads about natural history, one is aware, but fantastic areas based in the development of life on Earth, which doesn't necessarily, isn't something that can be put down to human involvement, human deprivation, human destruction, habitat, human hunting. But it seems to be, for example, that there's a fantastic wastage in terms of each generation producing, whether among mammals or insects, there's a gigantic proportion of the young who do not survive into purity. There is a savage predation.
Nature ready tooth and claw.
Beyond satiation, which means giving far more than they need to live. Think of the age of the dinosaurs. A depressing spectacle of endless, bloody, savage predation and massive waste. So are we not being a little over-optimistic in your theology? I know God doesn't do waste, but perhaps there's something slightly wrong with the cosmos which involves such great, large amounts of waste, which is not without people sick.
Certainly, the destruction and dying and destruction is an integral part of the whole creation process. I mean, we all turn to dust. We will all turn to dust we're built on the foundations of the dust of others. That's part of the whole process. What I think has happened, and particularly happened in the last 100 years, perhaps 200 years, is the, in a sense, the usurpation of the process, of the whole process, by one, which I think is what we're seeing at the moment. We in this natural process. I mean, I don't think Francis was a vegetarian, and I'm not a vegetarian. I think that there's a species feed on other species. It's a part of the way things are, part of the way the world's made. What I do think is wrong is the feeding on species unthinkingly, uncaringly, unreverently, ungenerously, and fundamentally destructively, which sees other creatures simply just as there for our use. And I think that is not part of God's original plan. I think it is an example of human hubris and of that tendency, particularly amongst humans, to exploit, use, abuse, and to forget God, and forget where it all comes from. So, I mean, going back to your original thing about the church fathers, there's, I mean, yes, Augustine does talk about creation itself as form. I mean, the church fathers don't just talk about that, they also talk about the innate goodness of all creation as well. And you don't just have to read, well, you shouldn't just read Augustine on his own. But yes, there is that flaw which Paul recognises, that groaning of creation, everything waiting in expectation for the full fulfilment, for the true goal. I don't think it's being over optimistic, actually. I think Francis certainly was pretty hard on human sin.
I've heard that Charles Darwin, through his studies of the natural world, came to feel that there was a lot of cruelty involved in the way that creatures lived together, and that this made him actually doubt that there was a loving God. And I'm wondering how a Franciscan would help Charles Darwin to reconcile his understanding of what's going on in the natural world, with a view that there is a God who cares.
Certainly, yes, nature reigning tooth and claw. When the fox gets amongst our hens, I'm not too keen on the fox and on the natural process. I believe that we do have a wisdom of compassion and of generosity and of gentleness and of humility to bring into the natural world. You can talk about nature as being, cruel and so on, but nature is also hugely cooperative. You can see it as that way. It depends, I think, what sort of a night you've had before, whether you see it as essentially cruel and essentially destructive or as essentially cooperative. In fact, I think the case could be made that it's more cooperative and interdependent than cruel and destructive. It depends which way you look at it.
Thank you again for your contributions. It seems to me that today it's even more urgent that people get a handle on what you're saying about the three values. But at the same time, it seems the world has more and more distractions to make hubris more likely. So what would you consider the wise priorities of Christians to play their part in putting it right?
Bake your own bread. Bake a loaf of bread. Really. It's really important. One of the founders of a religious community about 40 years ago said that if you want to get the community right, you've got to get the bread right first. There is something about baking bread, the process of baking bread, not in a bread mixer, bread maker, but doing it by hand, knowing it, loving the texture of the grain and so on, knowing how it works, having a reverence for it, being surprised by it when it comes out right. All that is actually, you've got to begin somewhere, you know. Luther was asked what he would do if he heard that the Son of Man was returning tomorrow. What would he do? And he said, I would plant a tree today. Start where you are. Love the place. Grow your food. Share a meal. Bake your bread. Make community. Recycle your rubbish. Campaign, vote, work, cooperate. All those things. And which are happening. And you hear the terribleness, you hear the warnings going on. And perhaps I've given a few warnings, but actually there's a huge amount going on. It's rather exciting. And there's a joy in it. So, begin where you are. Begin where you are. And I can give you, I'm sure you know them as well, where you're starting. There is never an excuse for not starting. Don't be paralyzed.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much for our encouragement to get started in becoming more aware of the creation around us, and that we're part of the same creation. Thank you very much indeed. God bless you. Please do make a contribution if you can to the running of these talks. There is a basket at the back. There is another talk next week, and I will tell you this. It is Nicholas Gendel, who's going to talk to us about the life of St. Francis in Renaissance Italian art. So please do come. God bless you.